Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Mondays, when authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a debut crime writer, a journalist and a national convener for Sisters in Crime Australia, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. But before I introduce Judith Rossell, I acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Judith, you started out as a scientist but made a dramatic career switch, and for more than 2 decades now you've been immersed in the world of children's books. You've illustrated more than 80 books and written 15. Your books have been published in the UK and the US and translated into more than 20 languages. Each of your books in the Stella Montgomery series, Montgomery Trilogy, Withering-By-Sea, Wormwood, Mire, as well as Wakestone Hall, have each won a Davitt Award for Best Children's Book, not to mention numerous other books. Welcome, Judith. Before we get to the questions, please give us your elevator pitch for your award-winning children's crime novel, Wakestone Hall.
Thanks, Karina. Yes, Wakestone Hall is, this is what it looks like in hardback and this in paperback. And it's the 3rd book in the Stella Montgomery series. And in this story, Stella gets sent away to boarding school by her mean aunts. It's the school where they actually went and where her dead mother was expelled. Well, she wasn't dead at the time, but she got expelled from school. So it's all very dark and mysterious and scary. And Stella heads off there and is almost immediately plunged into a frightening adventure.
Sounds perfect. Let's get to our cards. Tell us something not in your book about a main character.
I'm not one of those writers who does a lot of extra work beyond what's in the book, but I was thinking about this and realizing that the backstory of Stella's mother, which is that she climbed out of the window at school, ran away with a street musician and got pregnant, she must have, and got expelled for that. That's the mysterious thing that comes out about her life. And I realize I really don't dwell on that in my story for 10-year-olds, but
no,
clearly that's a bit of backstory there.
Yeah. That's great hidden backstory. Would you write a crime book about the pandemic?
No, I wouldn't, but I'd certainly read one. Yeah. I mean, I feel like when we're in the middle of it right now, my experience of the pandemic, and I know this makes me lucky, is it's very boring.
Yeah.
I know we're lucky to be bored by it and not terrified by it, but no, it doesn't strike me in that way. But I'd read one, read a good pandemic story, definitely.
When and how do you work out plot twists and red herrings?
I work them out as I go. And it's so I'm moaning because I'm in the middle of one with my new book right at the moment. Yes, just as I go, I start to think, what could this mean? What could be happening here? It's definitely, I'm not someone who plans them all in advance.
Yeah.
And so it's just a constant effort of trying to work out what fits together, what that could mean, what would be an interesting twist.
Yeah. What started you on a life of crime?
I started off as an illustrator. I worked as an illustrator for years, and I did illustrate a lot of picture books, which were very sweet with little rabbits and bunnies and things like that in them. And I was very happy to do that work, but I also had ideas for darker pictures, and if I'd been asked to illustrate something like that, I probably wouldn't have written it. But I ended up writing the Stella Montgomery series partly because I really wanted to draw the pictures that go along with it.
Wow. What's the hardest part about writing a novel?
Writing. Writing the novel is the hardest part of writing the novel. It's because even a children's novel is a lot of words, and it's not the sort of thing you can do in a flash of genius, unfortunately. If you ever have one. It's the sort of thing you have to keep at for weeks and months. That, for me, is the hardest part. It's that effort, the long, determined effort.
Yeah. What's your top writing tip, and what's your top self-editing tip?
Oh, my top writing tip is keep writing, even when it's difficult, every day, if you can, and keep going. And I remember when I started, I thought that perhaps I would have this genius moment where it all becomes clear to me. And so I didn't write. I was waiting for that genius moment. But I don't think there is a genius moment, certainly not for me. So keep writing. And that's my top writing tip. And my top editing tip would be, I find it very useful to read aloud what I've written. It's very helpful to find all kinds of things that could be fixed, really. What the words sound like can usually be improved. Even to an empty room, but you could also read it to, I don't know, people on the tram.
Yeah. On the tram.
Good. Get some feedback from the world.
Why is crime so appealing as a genre?
Well, it's the dark side of humanity, which is always interesting. I think we like to see things fixed as well. I think we like to see a problem solved or a mystery fixed or bad people, getting their comeuppance. I think there's a real satisfaction in that.
Yeah. How do you approach representing diverse communities?
What an interesting question. It is interesting, isn't it? Especially if you're white, like I am. We have to be really aware that is not a baseline.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of other experiences in the world. Carefully is what I would say. If you're interested in writing about people of ethnic origin that's different from your own, I think it's really important to do good, careful, thoughtful research into that. It's very important. It's important with kids writing particularly. I think kids need to see themselves represented in stories. That's really important, but also they need to see other people represented as well. It's particularly a problem for white boys because I understand that white boys are the only group in our community that can get all the way through childhood and never read a book about something other than them.
Yeah.
And that's not great, is it?
Yeah, that surprises me. Even reading about women characters or female characters, girl characters, I guess, boys don't. Yeah.
We discourage our boys from reading girl books.
Yeah.
70% of protagonists in kids' books are white boys.
Yeah, that surprises me. How much of a profile do you do for each character before you write?
Personally, I don't do that, although I do advise my students to do it. I tend to discover them as the story unfolds. I find out what they're like in different scenes in the story.
Yeah. What's the scariest thing in your novel?
Oh, I actually know the answer to this. Not my current novel, but the first one in the Stella Montgomery series has a scene which heaps of kids have told me is too scary. And it's Stella is living in a big spooky hotel, and at nighttime, burglars, bad people break into the hotel and light a hand of glory, which is a preserved hand of a hanged person with a candle flame on each finger, and the smoke makes everyone in the hotel go to sleep except for Stella. So she's running around, and she actually has to stamp on the hand to put it out, and she's got bare feet and she's stamping, and its claws are clawing at her foot, and it is actually quite a scary scene. And I've had kids tell me that that's as far as they got into the book.
As an adult, I'm with them. Who's your favourite crime fiction character?
Oh, that's tricky, isn't it?
Mm.
I'm going to have to go with the classics. I do love a bit of Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'll put Sherlock up there for me.
What is your writing routine?
I'm working on this at the moment. The pandemic, I'm trying to, make the most of the time. So I'm trying to write every morning, and at the moment I'm trying to write between 10 and 11, and then 11:30 till 12:30. So 2 hours in the morning, and then I can write more if I want to, but that's the minimum.
Yeah. What's the best way to dig yourself out of a bad plot hole?
Oh, well, sometimes it's helpful to put it aside, isn't it, and come back to it and have another look. Sometimes you have to go back. I think probably throwing some hard written scenes away, going back a bit and having another run at it.
Yeah.
Not great when that happens.
Do you start with the plot or the character or something else?
What a good question. I think I tend to start with a scene. It's probably the illustrator in me, but I imagine a scene. So in the first Stella Montgomery book, I had this very clear idea in my head of a little girl reading an atlas in a conservatory, which was very shadowy and dark and wet. Quite a dark series in one. So she's reading her atlas and she sees something she shouldn't have because she's hidden. And yeah, so I think I start with a scene and then go from there.
And so would you draw that scene first, Judith, or would you write it?
Well, either actually. I go either way on that.
Yeah.
I think as an illustrator, the trap to fall into is to write scenes just because you want to illustrate them. So I try not to do too much drawing until the story has some sort of shape.
Yeah. Okay. What research did you do for your last novel?
Oh, heaps. I do love a research. My stories are set in a version of the 1880s. And in the case of Wakestone Hall, I did read a lot of memoirs about people who went to boarding school back then. They're extraordinary. There was one school where the girls were not allowed to speak to each other at all, except at meal times, and then it had to be in French and of an elevating nature.
Ooh.
I put that in my book just because it's so bizarre, but I think people will probably think I made it up.
Oh, sounds terrible. How do you write about violence?
Oh, well, my readers are mostly between about 9 and 12. And so I think very carefully before I write about violence. And a lot of the worst violence in my stories happens off stage. So in the first book, there is a murder, but Stella doesn't see it. She hears about it. And I think carefully is how I write about violence. There's quite a bit of violence. What I like is if my baddie gets killed, but from something he did or she did. They create a problem which, results in bad things happening to them rather than active violence from my main character because, I struggle a bit with the idea of, young kids being very violent.
Yeah. No, that's good. How important is place in your writing?
Very important, yes. This series had I had a very strong sense of the places the stories were set, and each of the three is set in a different place. But they are invented places, but based on, bits and pieces of places I've visited. In Wakestone Hall, the final book, I spent a few days in Glasgow on holidays, and it is based very loosely and unrecognisably on Glasgow.
Okay, yeah. How many drafts do you write before handing it in?
Oh, I'm one of those people who fiddles with it. all the time. And so I go back and I go back as I'm going. So by the time I get to the end, I suppose that's a first draft, but it's a fairly fiddled with first draft. And I might have one more go through before I hand it in. Yep.
Fabulous. And our last question for the day, how would you get away with murder?
Oh, well, having watched many episodes of Midsummer's Murders and things like that, I would say just do it and leave it alone. So don't go back and murder a whole bunch of other people in order to cover up the first murder.
Good tip.
So just one and move on.
Judith Rossell, thank you very much for being with us on Murder Mondays.
Thanks so much, Karina. Thank you for having me.